The first two shots, I didn't realize what they were, but the third shot, after it was fired, I heard Mrs. Kennedy scream, "Oh no, they've shot Jack," and it was just sort of sent a chill over you. It was just terrible.
I can remember seeing the side of the president's ear and head come off. I remember a flash of white and the red and just bits and pieces of flesh exploding from the president's head. At that time, I turned to Gail and said, "That's it, hit the ground." And we turned and hit the ground and covered our children. But when the third shot was fired, I thought it came from directly behind towards the grassy knoll behind me. I based that primarily on the third shot from what I saw of the side of the president's head coming off and from the sound of the rifle, the report of the rifle. I was interviewed by the FBI, but I did not testify before the Warren Commission. It's my understanding the reason I did not go before the Warren Commission was because in my statement that I thought the shots came from directly behind implied the shots were coming from the grassy knoll. This is something apparently the Warren Commission did not want to hear. They wanted to keep the direction of the assassination in the direction of the school book depository.
The Forbes own Nassau Island near Cape Cod, and this is where it gets interesting. Michael Payne's mother, Ruth Forbes Young's best friend, is Mary Bancroft, a CIA agent and spy. But there is more. She is the longtime mistress of Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, and a prime member of the Warren Commission. Both Bancroft and Dulles were frequent visitors to Nassau Island and knew Michael well. Ruth and Michael spent summers on Nassau Island, and Ruth will spend time there in the summer of 1963, right before leaving to pick up Marina Oswald to live with her for the 2 months before the assassination. You think that's something? Well, there's way more. On Ruth's side, her father is William A. Hyde. He did extensive work for the Agency for International Development in Latin America. AID was a well-known cover for CIA agency personnel, and Hyde's filed reports were directly routed to the CIA. Further, in 1957, he was under consideration by the CIA for covert use in Vietnam. Ruth Paine's sister is Sylvia Hoke. Hoke was a psychologist and an employee for the CIA beginning in 1954. After leaving Nassau Island late in the summer of '63, Ruth traveled to D.C. for several days with Sylvia before leaving to pick up Marina. You seriously couldn't have more CIA connections in two families if you tried. And let's move to the day of the assassination. An hour after the killing, Michael is at his office at Bell Helicopter in Fort Worth. He calls Ruth. And remember that this is before Lee Oswald has even been reported to be a subject. What Michael doesn't know is that the phone call is being monitored. Michael is reported as saying that Oswald will be blamed for the killing, but they both knew who was really responsible for the assassination. Ruth will admit that the phone call took place, but will try and deny that that is exactly what was said. In Dallas, the police do 2 searches of the Paine home the day of the assassination, and yet the backyard photos are not found or listed in any inventory sheets. They will be found in a separate search the next day. And the Imperial reflex camera that took the famous backyard photos and a miniature Minox spy camera won't be located until weeks later. Here's the official report. Yet somehow the Imperial reflex camera that supposedly took the backyard photos will miraculously show up in the already searched bags of Oswald in the garage. And here again is a report that shows the bags were already searched and no camera was present. The Minox spy camera will actually be withheld by the FBI and then will be claimed by Michael Paine, who said he had dropped it in salt water and cleaned it with kerosene, eliminating, of course, any fingerprints. It gets worse. Several weeks after the assassination, real doubt was being shed on whether Lee Oswald had ever even traveled to Mexico City, as was claimed by intelligence services. The CIA had provided photos and voice of someone clearly not Oswald. Miraculously, again, it is Ruth Paine who comes to the rescue, suddenly finding postcards and printed material in a room used by Oswald in her home. And then finally, the Walker letter. 8 days after the assassination of President Kennedy on November 30th, Ruth Paine supposedly inadvertently discovers evidence that Lee Oswald had attempted to assassinate General Walker. Among the letters that Ruth Paine repeatedly sent to Marina was a thick book of household advice in Russian. Ruth said the book contained an undated note left by Lee for Marina on April 10th, and when it was analyzed, 7 sets of prints were on it, none of them belonging to either Lee or Marina. And it's funny, but Michael Paine will move back into the home right after the assassination. And finally, we're not quite done yet, because Ruth is going to turn up once again years later, this time in Nicaragua, supposedly trying to help leftist Sandinistas who are fighting for fair wages and freedom against the right-wing Contras. The U.S. government is secretly funneling money and support to the Contras, and many people down there think Ruth was a spy taking pictures and gathering info on the Sandinistas she was claiming to be trying to help.
What really struck me was especially the head wound. They showed a nice little neat round bullet hole in the back of his head. When actually what I saw was the whole side of his head blown off. It was gone. I don't know where those things came from, but they're totally wrong. Every one of them.
In 1964, the Warren Commission dealt with this evidence by not looking at it. It was made available to them. They felt if they looked at it, they would have to deal with it and publish it. So they didn't deal with it. In 1977, around that time frame, the House Assassinations Committee had the photographs. What they did with it was even less excusable. They had the photographs, they had the questions that were brought to them about the photographs, and they did not allow the Dallas doctors, the most important witnesses in this particular area of the evidence, to even view them. And the reason seems quite clear. If they have the best eyewitnesses looking at the photographs saying that's not the condition of the president's head, then you not only have a conspiracy to kill the president, but absolute proof of the conspiracy to cover it up after the fact, because the only people who had the photographs were the government. If somebody faked those photographs, it was someone within the government, someone who had access to those photographs.
In the late 70s, the House Select Committee on Assassinations looked at the evidence of the Kennedy assassination, and one of the most disturbing things about that evidence when they looked at it was the fact that there were a team of doctors where Kennedy had been taken right after he was shot in Dallas. These are Dallas doctors who were experienced in trauma who had said he had a hole in the back of his head. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was trying to say that Oswald had done it, and with a hole in the back of the head, if you're being shot in the back and the bullet blowing out in front, that doesn't fit. So the House Select Committee reported that it had refuted the Dallas doctors. The Dallas doctors had all got it wrong because they had better witnesses. Their witnesses were the witnesses that were there in the morgue during the autopsy. And they said that 26 witnesses that they'd interviewed all endorsed the autopsy photographs showing the head wound up here. None of them agreed that there was a wound back here.
There is no medical evidence that President Kennedy was hit from the front and to the right.
But they didn't let us see the interviews. They didn't let us see the documents that these people had prepared. In fact, they were scheduled to have been suppressed until 2028. When the documents tumbled out in the mid-1990s, lo and behold, the autopsy witnesses, who the House Select Committee had interviewed, said the same thing the Dallas doctors did. The hole in the head was back here. They drew diagrams showing a hole in the head back here or back here, and it became very apparent that the House Select Committee had just interviewed these people, suppressed their testimonies, and then misrepresented them in their report.
The forensic pathological panel simply says that if he was shot at from the front and to the right, the shot missed.
The doctors who were supposed to evaluate the medical evidence for the House Select Committee on Assassinations never saw these suppressed interviews where not only were the Dallas doctors saying there was a hole in the back of the head here, but so were the morgue witnesses saying there was a hole in the back of the head. So it was a complete abomination. It was perhaps the most dishonest thing that was ever done, and it was apparently done to keep Oswald as the central figure in this scenario.
If the brain was not sectioned, then there could be no visualization of its interior. It's as if it never existed. I am very, very suspicious. And I do think that it could have been the height of a sinister conspiratorial activity in the post-assassination cover-up in this case to make sure that the brain was not examined in order to be able to disprove, or at least to be able to withhold the attempts by other people, me and other critics, to prove that there was a second gunman firing from the right side. Because again, you see, that gets to the question of whether or not there was a conspiracy.
The suspect's name is Jack Rubenstein, I believe. He goes by the name of Jack Ruby.
Did you know Ruby before this? No, sir. Saw him in this very same room Friday night when we had the defendant up here. If some of you will recall, he asked a question from out here in the audience, or answered a question. He's standing right back here, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was a member of the press, and he told me as we walked out of here that he was a nightclub operator here.
What question did he ask?
What?
What question did he ask?
I don't remember, but he maybe it was an answer, but he said something.
Remember it was Friday night when I asked you to look to me like your good friend. I don't know.
We have not been able to find anyone of our men who saw and recognized Ruby at the time of this transfer.
Did you recognize him when he came through?
Yes, I have known Jack Ruby for a number of years, and I recognized him just as soon as he emerged from the crowd.
Chief Curry, would you comment on the presence of Jack Ruby in the basement of City Hall while Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred? How did he get there?
Well, of course, it's been pretty well established by this time that he came in the ramp entrance, on the Main Street entrance. And the officer who was guarding this door had stepped away to permit a vehicle to come out. It wasn't necessary that he do this, but he had stepped across the sidewalk to assist a vehicle coming out of the basement. That's when Ruby came into the basement. And this was less than 2 minutes before Oswald was brought down.
We're at the Lewiston Raceway in Lewiston, Maine, with Mrs. Nancy Hamilton, owner of the Hamilton Stables. Mrs. Hamilton, did you testify as a witness before the Warren Commission?
Yes, I did, on June 2nd, 1964.
And before that, were you employed by Jack Ruby?
Yes, I was. This was in 1961 in Dallas at his club, the Carousel, and I was bartender, waitress, and rather the manager there.
How did you get that job?
I had gone into Dallas not knowing anyone, and of course the first place I went was the police department. And they were very kind and got me the job there.
They got you the job by Jack Ruby?
Yes, they did.
Did they know Ruby?
Personally, oh yes, very well. Vouched for him, wonderful person, great man, well known by the Dallas Police Department.
Did you ever serve drinks to Dallas police officers?
Oh, yes. In fact, the Dallas police officers were the special boys, shall we say. We even had private stock for them.
Private stock?
Oh, yes. They wouldn't, bar liquor wasn't for them. We had names such as Hagen Haig or Black Label. The very, very high-priced drinks on the house, of course. You'd never come in. That was a gross oversight if you ever charged a Dallas police officer or any official of the city of Dallas or Tarrant County.
Well, other than the Dallas police officers, what officials did frequent Ruby's establishment?
Oh, such as your district attorney, which would be Mr. Wade.
Did you know Ruby before this?
No, sir. Saw him in this very same room Friday night when we had the defendant up here, and he's standing right back here, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was a member of the press, and he told me as we walked out of here that he was a nightclub operator here.
You look to me like your good friend. I don't know.
Did Ruby perform any other favors for the Dallas police officers?
Well, yeah, well, favors. We call them favors. I suppose so. He provided girls, gambling, and booze.
How many Dallas police officers would you estimate Jack Ruby knew on a personal basis?
At least half, and probably 2/3.
There were almost 1,200 police officers in Dallas in 1963. Would you say Ruby knew 600 of them?
Oh, easily.
A great deal has been written about the relationship of the Dallas Police Department with Jack Ruby. We have 1,200 men in our department, and we had each man to submit a report regarding his knowledge or acquaintance with Jack Ruby. Less than 50 men even knew Jack Ruby.
He used to frequent the Dallas Police Department, and he used to brag, oh, I can get this fixed for you, or I can get that fixed for you.
Did the Dallas Police Department or District Attorney's Office ever do any favors for Jack Ruby?
Several that I could probably name, such as serving drinks a little late.
I mean, Ruby was permitted to serve drinks after hours.
He did, and no one ever interfered. And, of course, it was common knowledge that he ran girls and gambling, and I've never seen him any kind of pickup on it.
Did you serve mixed drinks to police officers?
Yeah.
Is it against the law in Dallas to serve mixed drinks?
Oh, yes, definitely, except in a private club.
This, of course, was not a private club.
No, open club.
So that every time you served a drink to a police officer, it was a violation of the law?
Yes, not so. That's why I broke the law a few hundred times in doing so.
And of course, the police were witnesses.
Well, up to a point they were witnesses. After that, I guess they probably didn't care.
Oswald was a very mysterious person. To find out more about him, we have asked Ron Lewis, a friend of Oswald's, to join us. Mr. Lewis, I understand that you work with Oswald in New Orleans.
We both worked for Guy Bannister, but he didn't pay us. We got paid from another source.
Who is Guy Bannister?
He was the head of the Chicago office of the FBI, and he also supplied guns for the Cuban refugees. And Lee told me this was a CIA operation.
What did Oswald do for Guy Bannister?
He went on to college campuses and he gathered information for the FBI. And he also recruited people to work for Guy Bannister.
Did Oswald ever handle gun shipments at 544 Camp Street?
He brought in a shipment of ammunition, and part of those were kept at 544 Camp Street. Part was taken in a laundry truck to Lake Pontchartrain. I remember this because the boxes were very heavy, and Lee was not a muscular person, and he sometimes said he was going to quit because of it.
Is it true that Oswald had worked with Jack Ruby in New Orleans?
He told me that Jack Ruby drove the laundry truck.
The Warren Commission said that Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby never knew each other. Are you saying that they did know each other?
They knew each other very well.
Considerable evidence of Oswald's links with agents from the CIA and the FBI in the months before the assassination. In August 1963 in Dallas, the CIA operative Antonio Veciana met with his case officer Maurice Bishop. Bishop was the CIA coordinator of the most violent anti-Castro exile group. And in Dallas, he also met with Lee Harvey Oswald.
I saw Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas in a meeting of 10 or 15 minutes with Mr. Maurice Bishop in Dallas in that time.
And you feel certain that Oswald was working with or associated with American intelligence?
Well, at least he was associated with Maurice Bishop. And if Maurice Bishop was intelligence, he was working for the intelligence service in the United States, I don't doubt that he was working with him.
The Select Committee on Assassinations will at this time come to order.
The most damaging sealed documents of the House Select Committee on Assassinations accuse high-ranking officials of the Central Intelligence Agency of lying to the people of the United States about Lee Harvey Oswald. House investigators believe this man, David Atlee Phillips, met with Oswald 2 months before the assassination. Phillips was the CIA's chief of Western Hemisphere operations and was in charge, among other things, of plots against Fidel Castro. According to the secret reports, Antonio Viciana, a leader of anti-Castro Cubans directed by the CIA, saw Oswald talking to a senior CIA agent he knew by the cover name Maurice Bishop. Viciana provided enough information for House investigators to compile this sketch of the agent who met Oswald. Could it have been Phillips? Investigators believe it was. Phillips denied under oath that he knew Oswald, but House investigators did not believe him and wanted him charged with perjury. The government declined to prosecute, leaving investigators furious. The director of the CIA in 1963 was John McCone. He caused a sensation among committee staffers when he admitted there was an agent using the cover name Bishop. But a secret memo reveals he was allowed to reverse his testimony. A CIA lawyer wrote the committee, "I should inform you that he had been in error." In summary, Mr. McCone withdraws his statements on this point. The man who fingered Maurice Bishop, Antonio Viciana, was shot in the head soon after testifying, but survived. Frightened, he will no longer talk about the case. We caught up with him in Florida.
They wounded me in the head. He trying to kill me.
You know why? Why were they?
I don't know. Perhaps the FBI knows. The FBI knows.
Did they tell you?
No. Ask him. Ask them.
David Atlee Phillips died of cancer in 1988.